Good morning still to everybody, and I'm still excited for the last moments with the game. But yes, instead of that kind of excitement, I'm now going to concentrate on a few words. Especially focus and attention, trying to locate them in my practice. So my presentation will be based mostly on PowerPoint pictures. So yeah, I propose you to have a full screen mode for seeing them. Yeah, yesterday it was interesting to see how artificial intelligence treats visual matter of objects and faces without caring the nature of human gaze, which has a certain built-in pattern for searching focus in them. And so I will now orbit around the notion of out of focus and searching part out of focus, out of the focus. Or as it's somehow tricky to get outside of that outer side, I then ended up to approach it from its inner side. My original aim on this presentation was to continue further with a workshop I've been working with. In that, by filling the entire field of sight of participants by a honeycombed mask, I was experimenting to cut out the narrow area of the point of fixation and shift the focus to the areas out of the focus. And also here, the focus of my interests is mainly outside the focus. But so today, instead of that experiment on the spot, I start with the words. So the expression out of focus is related to the impression of being focused. And out of focus is then something which is not focused, which is not sharp, not blurry, indistinct, blurred, obscure, unclear or fuzzy. Out of focus is usually this way used rather as an adjective, whereas I'm more interested in its spatial character. In this space here, in Light Studio, in VES, so on very practical level, first out of focus, and focus especially is related to optics and to the fixtures and to the practices for stage, including acts for directing, sharpening, softening and framing the light beam. So focusing the fixtures is really a basic operation if working with conventional lighting fixtures. But going more backwards in time with the dictionary, so the Latin origin of the word is in the fireplace, which is sort of central point and hearth of something which invites to gather and to come together. But the fireplace also radiates outwards. The direction of focus is then outwards from the point of the focus. So the point of focus in its origin can be seen as a point of convergence, but also as one of divergence. So today the word is used in various contexts, most of them concentrating on concentration. The primary meanings are referring to the center or the main point of attention or interests. But of course, focus is also a term of physics, as it's the point where waves of light or sound or other radiation meet after moving toward each other. So focus is especially common term in optics, where it refers to a center, a focal point, especially to a point of the convergence on the lens, but also to the target, where the beam of light is directed and defined. So it's also the fact of the phenomena of the convergence and the quality of focus. For example, focus from soft into sharp. But so to focus is a verb. As it's a noun, it's also a verb, both directed intention. And it's also defined as concentration of attention. So this is my first stop, where I have some questions. Because in the practice of lighting design, the term of focus is related to various practical and technical levels. But however, I find the term worth to be considered more extensively as one central concept of lighting design in general. So, which way and to what extent the practice of lighting design is related to the questions of attention? Spotlight is a material fact and a concrete tool in the practice of lighting. And it's also used a lot as a metaphor. So the beam of light is a common mean and metaphor for focusing and directing attention. Spotlight points out a chosen detail, and it offers the gaze a pre-selected and structured focus. So focus is related to attention, but then what is the relation of attention to intention? And what is attention? So Bernhard Waldenfels has posed the question in his book, Phenomenology of the Alien. He asked, what is attention? And he presents the metaphor of spotlight as an example of a selective form of intention. But he discards the example as inadequate to describe the nature of attention. And his reason for that seems to be that such straightforwardness of highlighting, it risks to override something what escapes the spotlight. So Waldenfels probably discards the metaphor because he's seeking for another quality for defining attention. And he is struggling with a delicate problem there, how to analyze and describe the alien without eliminating its alien character. And the same quality of attention might be needed if exploring the obscure character of gloom, or if aiming to focus out of focus. Waldenfels speaks about a kind of attention which is not a subjective act, but something comes to our attention. So that something is not at our disposal, waiting to be pointed out, but these events, as he puts it, rather surprise us or even attack us. So to designate these events, Waldenfels proposed an old term, pathos. Okay. In the previous description, the definition of focus was very much restricted to the intention, to concentration and convergence. And it was aiming for qualities like clearness, clarity, sharpness, visibility. By central definitions, the term of focus is largely related to the notion of attention. But here, as an evaluation, Waldenfels relates the term of attention to the concept of pathos. And now the notion of attention starts to get attributes which no longer fit backwards to that previous kind of definition of focus. Attention as pathos, it's not intentional. It's not a subjective act, but rather an event. Something happens to us, but it do not follow a causal or any chronological logic. And it's pointed out, pathic event is not interpreting nor sense-giving. The concept of pathos, rather, seems to offer a possibility to be approached by more spatial and heterogeneous attributes. And here, and I will return to the article later in more details, I refer particularly to an article of Sami Santanen, in which I paid attention to the spatial and evental terms used to describe the character of pathic. And among them, especially how there was given weight to the French word écart. It's a word hard to translate in English. It can be understood as spacing, but also as diverse, discard, distance, separate, move apart. So as spacing as spread or withdraw. It is these spatial and evental dimensions of this term of pathic that especially attract my interest. As an event, the pathic seems to happen same time in the center and simultaneously being withdrawing outwards from the focus. So, pathos seems to be something what escapes the spotlight, something what locates simultaneously in the center and on the outer borders. So, how to focus a pathic light? Okay, now small stretch. I ask you to open a second window for a netlink if your device allows you to do so. Because in the beginning, I had a picture from that spatial embodied experiment. I had planned to shift the focus out of the focus. And now, instead of an experiment here on the spot, I would like to present an image taken by Finnish photographer Jorma Puranen. It's from his series Shadows, Reflections, and some other that kind of stuff. And you can open the picture on your own device through the address on the screen. And if someone is able also to take it from here and put it on the chat, so you it will stay then there available. The address is kansallisgalleria.fi/object/617087. Okay, I wish you can find the picture. The work is in collections of Finnish National Gallery, and so it's available there through their service. Okay, this is the form of the picture. It's a photograph. Puranen has photographed old portraits in a museum collection on the spot, just as they are exhibited, with all the natural reflections of light on the surface of paintings, portraying them there and portraying their certain relationship with light and focusing. Light disturbs and obstructs. The relationship with light is a constant adaptation. It may be unconscious, but it is not passive. I constantly act to make my own arrangements to cope with the changing circumstances. Even without noticing, I take a step to the side, tilt my head, squint my eyes. I don't go against, but I respond and react. I suppose that in relation to the surroundings, the attention is most of time dispersed. So in front of an image of reflections, these acts have a less effect. On the presented image, my gaze is disturbed from finding an evident place to rest. But instead of one focus, it offers several. And focus keeps on undulating between the layers of picture. Same kind of effect I find in some artificial pictures yesterday, where the focus was not somehow made for human natural approach, and so the gaze kept on undulating. There may be even more on the surface. The specialty in this picture of Puranen, I find that it creates the effect focus on the depth of layers. And to define some different qualities of attention, I'll now follow a discussion around some classic concepts related to attention. And so I will go now back to Bernd Waldenfels and to the notion of pathic. And as I earlier mentioned, it was the philosopher and lecturer Sami Santanen who has introduced Waldenfels and the concept of pathic to me. In fact, in his article titled Dimensions of Touch in the research project Figures of Touch, funded by the Academy of Finland, years 2009 to 2012. In that same article, where Santanen presents the pathic dimensions of touch, he points out the classical formulation of Roland Barthes as he describes how Waldenfels compares the pathic experience to what Barthes calls punctum in a photograph. And there he refers to the twin concepts of punctum and studium, which are related to the notion of attention and which I find closely related to the issue of the nature of light on stage. Barthes describes punctum as a prick of a photograph, as a touch, a strange element in the photograph, one that disturbs studium, which then can be seen studium as the intentional, cognitive and informative aspect of attention. So Waldenfels himself relates pathic with punctum, and that's what for some reason have been irritating me. For some reason I have not been really able to locate. But a text of Rancière have given me one possible explanation for that feeling of friction. This Jacques Rancière, a French Algerian philosopher, has concentrated in one essay in the Emancipated Spectator on the articulation Barthes has done between punctum and studium when he was presenting these two as two opposites. And Jacques Rancière refutes the opposition between studium and punctum. And here his critique is described is directed towards Barthes' examples and the arguments Barthes has used for validating the distinction. And Rancière insists that in the given examples, which are numerous in Barthes' book, finally the logic of punctum is not detached from the logic of studium. And Rancière, he does not reject the idea of the punctum, but and he goes with it later and elaborates it. But however, for me here, the example of this refuting the opposition pointed out a connection between several cultural acts, all of them aiming to cut the object out of its surroundings in order to enable concentration for a closer examination. It's also for that reason I found interesting Rancière's note that Barthes has chosen the details for their quality as details, as detachable elements. So through this strict reading, the notion of punctum, instead of staging for a pathic spotlight, It rather appears to be relating to the previous metaphor of spotlight, which was used to describe attention as a selective form of intention. And this appears contradictory to the proposed pathic character of punctum. This aim or effort to show and point out details as detachable elements from their surroundings, I relate it to the more general effort to obscure and erase the surroundings for framing and detaching the focused object. And as an act, I find it strongly intertwined with some tasks of lighting as a sort of basic practice in the practices of lighting design. And for this practice, in an anthology of printmaking published by Academy of Fine Arts, I met an interesting parallel in an article written by visual artist Salla Myllylä. Through the relationship of a subject and its background, Myllylä addresses a basic operation of visual culture, which is called syväys in Finnish. It's quite a specific term, not really in common use. It's a common practice of visual culture and graphic industry. The practice of isolating a subject from its background. And this is where I also find a parallel to yesterday's Tati film. In her article, Salla Myllylä quotes art historian James Elkins, who points out the notion of punctum, but claims that the most essential distinction between painting and photography is not the punctum, as proposed by Pates, but the surround. And the surround, as he calls it, differs from the background the painters know. As in painting, he says the backgrounds are put in mark by mark and are therefore always intended. As in photograph, therefore, the background of the focused object can be just something inevitable and even be considered as a sort of some sort of invisible part of a photograph. As Myllylä puts it, the surround is often unwanted stuff. So I sought here the quote in English from the book of Elkins. I read it directly. Photography gives us all kinds of things that we don't want it to give us. Boring things, repetitive things, things that are beside the point, annoying, buzzing distractions and the edges of our vision, unpleasant shadows, errant dust. Something what Salla Myllylä was chosen to start her article, and what I find really beautiful description. So the surround can be considered as something we don't want. And from a picture, it's possible to cut it out. In performance, the presence of the surroundings is inescapable, but presented or erased in variable doses. And this has brought me to ask what amount of surroundings our attention can tolerate. How much of environment a performance can bear, and what are the tools and means for the desired dosage? What could be the pathic qualities of focusing? I've started to examine different qualities of focusing out of focus. So by the workshop, Light Walks Out of Focus with the wax masks of honeycomb structure, I have explored the tension and relationship between the center and the peripheric zones of the field of sight. That experiment has had different character, depending on whether it's carried out outside or inside, or in white space, or in black box, or in natural daylight, or with artificial lighting. The experiment aimed for shifting the focus out of the focus, and by doing so, it was morphing the distances and dimensions both of space and of time. Another kind approach was in last month was performed a reading of audience. It was the first artistic part of doctorate of performance artist Tuomas Laitinen, and I did participate it as a member of artistic group. The event took place in a theater space and was an event of reading in 5 acts. All of the participants had their own pile of papers and a portable small lamp for their own use. In the space, each one concentrated on his or her own reading. And along the slow dimming of the lighting in the space, readers switched the lights on in their own time. And when the space got darker, there was plenty of concentrated focuses spread about the room. Though I wouldn't say that the attention was dispersed. Each one had his or her own focus, while all were concentrated on the same thing. And then here the last picture is from a period of 8 evenings on the chilly twilight on the beach in Hietalahti, where I did concentrate on the modalities of night vision and on off-center viewing as a scanning technique in minor light. That experiment was a part of my participation on Hietsu Night School and Beach Symposium, which were a co-project of several universities of Helsinki, organized this autumn on the beach, starting always after the sunset. I consider these experiments as a sort of spatial and evental sketches and material with which I will work further. And this is where I end today to have time for discussions. I will end in the dictionaries as I started. Because When focusing on the notion of focus, I found that there is already also a divergence in itself. Focus and chaos seem to be intertwined, even inside these words themselves, as are focus and surroundings. And as with these examples of spatial essays, I also later need myself to return back to the Japanese language, where the expression of attention has not really a meaning of being directed to one point, but it appears that it rather has a meaning that the word of attention, or the Japanese word, is something which is floating around simultaneously everywhere. And also the French word milieu, which is translated same time both as a center and as surroundings. That's the word where I end. I thank you for your attention. And I'll add the list of references in the end, so you can return to the references later on, if you wish. Thank you.